The sun hung high in the sky, painting the world in shades of gold and blue. It was one of those perfect summer days where everything seemed to slow down just enough for people to catch their breath. Birds chirped lazily from nearby trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass through the air. In the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maplewood Heights, life moved at its usual unhurried pace. Marcus Johnson sat on the edge of his pool, letting the cool water lap against his feet. He had earned this moment of peace after what felt like weeks of nonstop work. As the newly appointed police chief, Marcus had taken on more responsibilities than ever before. Between managing the department, addressing community concerns, and balancing his personal life, he rarely found time to relax. But today was different. The weekend had finally arrived, and Marcus decided it was time to treat himself. He leaned back slightly, his hands supporting him as he gazed around his backyard. The space wasn't enormous, but it was well maintained, a testament to how much effort he'd put into making this house feel like home. Flower beds lined the perimeter, bursting with vibrant colors that matched the cheerful atmosphere. A small wooden deck stretched out beside the pool, complete with lounge chairs and an umbrella-shaded table. It was simple, yet inviting. A place where anyone could unwind without feeling overwhelmed. As Marcus slipped into the pool, the refreshing water sent a shiver down his spine. He sighed contentedly, closing his eyes as he floated on his back. For a few precious minutes, all the stress melted away. There were no calls about emergencies, no meetings to attend, and no decisions weighing heavily on his mind. Just the soothing sound of water rippling around him and the warmth of the sun on his face. But even in this serene setting, Marcus couldn't help but think about the challenges he faced daily. Being the first black police chief in Maplewood Heights came with its own set of hurdles. Some residents welcomed him with open arms, grateful for fresh leadership and new ideas. Others, however, were skeptical, questioning whether he truly belonged in such a prestigious role. Marcus understood their doubts. He'd seen similar attitudes throughout his career. Still, he refused to let negativity define his experience. Instead, he focused on building trust within the community, one interaction at a time. As he paddled gently in the shallow end, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Despite the occasional bumps along the way, he loved living here. The neighborhood was picturesque, filled with families who cared deeply about their surroundings. Kids rode bikes up and down the streets, laughter echoing through the air. Neighbors exchanged pleasantries over white picket fences, creating a sense of camaraderie that made Maplewood Heights special. Little did Marcus know, this peaceful afternoon was about to take an unexpected turn. Somewhere nearby, someone watched. Him, not with admiration or curiosity, but with suspicion. Unbeknownst to Marcus, this person had already formed judgments based solely on appearances. And soon, those judgments would lead to a confrontation that neither party anticipated. Just as Marcus began to drift into a state of complete relaxation, a sharp voice pierced the calm. "Excuse me." The words sliced through the tranquil ambiance like a knife, startling him. Opening his eyes, Marcus turned toward the source of the interruption. Standing on the other side of the fence was Karen Whitmore, one of his neighbors. She peered over the wooden barrier with an expression of sheer disbelief, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. "What are you doing in my neighbor's pool?" Karen demanded, her tone dripping with accusation. Her piercing gaze locked onto Marcus as if trying to intimidate him into submission. "This isn't your house. You need to leave right now." Marcus blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the sudden intrusion. He pushed himself upright, standing waist-deep in the water so he could address her properly. "Ma'am," he said calmly, keeping his voice steady despite the absurdity of the situation. "This is my pool. I live here." Karen scoffed, clearly unconvinced. She tilted her head, scrutinizing him as though searching for evidence to disprove his claim. "Your pool?" she repeated skeptically. "Don't play games with me. I've lived in this neighborhood for years and I've never seen you around. You're obviously not supposed to be here." Her words stung, though Marcus tried not to let them show. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to remain composed. This wasn't the first time someone had questioned his presence in places they assumed he didn't belong. Whether it was being followed while shopping or receiving sideways glances during formal events, Marcus was no stranger to these kinds of encounters. But experiencing it in his own backyard, that was a new low. "Look," Marcus continued, his patience unwavering. "I understand why you might be confused. I moved in 6 months ago, so maybe we haven't crossed paths yet. But I assure you, this is my property." To prove his point, he gestured toward the house behind him. "See that door? That leads directly into my kitchen. If you want, I can grab some ID to show you." Karen waved off his explanation dismissively. "Oh, please," she snapped, rolling her eyes. "Do you really expect me to believe that? People like you don't usually live in neighborhoods like this." Her choice of words hung heavy in the air, carrying implications that left little room for misinterpretation. Marcus felt a flicker of anger ignite within him, but he quickly suppressed it. Losing his temper wouldn't solve anything. It would only escalate the situation further. Instead, he chose to respond with logic and reason. "People like me?" he echoed softly, raising an eyebrow. "What exactly does that mean?" Karen hesitated, perhaps realizing too late that she'd crossed a line. Still, she refused to back down. "You know what I mean," she muttered, avoiding direct eye contact. "You don't fit the profile. Maybe you're here to clean the pool or something. Either way, you shouldn't be swimming in it." At this point, Marcus couldn't decide whether to laugh or sigh in frustration. The absurdity of the situation bordered on comical. Here he was, the owner of the very home she accused him of trespassing in, and yet she remained utterly convinced of his guilt. It was almost surreal. "Well," Marcus replied dryly, crossing his arms over his chest, "I hate to disappoint you, but I'm not here to clean anything. This is my house and this is my pool. Unless you have proof otherwise, I suggest you stop accusing me of things I haven't done." Karen bristled at his response, her cheeks flushing red with indignation. Clearly she hadn't expected him to stand his ground so firmly. For a brief moment she looked as though she might storm off in defeat. But then, a sly smirk crept onto her face. Pulling out her phone, she held it up triumphantly. "Fine," she declared, her voice laced with smug satisfaction. "If you won't leave voluntarily, I'll call the cops. Let's see what they have to say about this." Marcus stared at her, incredulous. Did she truly think calling the authorities would resolve anything? More importantly, did she not realize who she was dealing with? As the realization dawned on him, a small part of Marcus couldn't help but find the irony amusing. If only Karen knew the truth. Karen's threat to call the police hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Marcus, still standing waist-deep in his pool, felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him: frustration, disbelief, and even a hint of amusement at the sheer absurdity of the situation. He had dealt with confrontations before, both as a police officer and now as chief, but this was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Here he was in his own backyard, being accused of trespassing by someone who clearly hadn't bothered to check her facts, or maybe didn't care to. "Go ahead," Marcus said finally, his tone calm but firm. "Call them. I'd be happy to explain everything." His words carried an unspoken challenge, one that Karen either missed or chose to ignore. She jabbed at her phone screen furiously, her fingers flying over the keypad as she dialed what she assumed would be her ticket to proving him wrong. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Before Karen could finish explaining herself to the dispatcher, 2 patrol cars rolled down the street, their presence drawing curious glances from neighboring houses. The officers weren't responding to Karen's call, they were simply conducting routine patrols in the area. Spotting the commotion near Marcus's fence, they decided to investigate. As the officers approached, Karen seized the opportunity to play the victim. Pointing dramatically at Marcus, she declared, "There he is, that man refuses to leave my neighbor's property. Arrest him right now." Her voice rose with each word, dripping with self-righteous indignation. For a moment, all eyes turned to Marcus, who stood silently in the pool, water glistening on his skin under the midday sun. The officers exchanged cautious glances. One of them, Officer Daniels, stepped forward and addressed Karen. "Ma'am, can you tell us what's going on here?" he asked, his tone neutral but professional. Karen launched into a rehearsed tirade about how Marcus had been trespassing and refused to listen to reason. She painted herself as the concerned citizen trying to protect her neighborhood from an intruder, oblivious to how ridiculous her story sounded when placed against the reality of the situation. Meanwhile, Marcus remained composed, letting Karen dig herself deeper into her own hole. When Officer Daniels turned to him for his side of the story, Marcus took a step forward, raising his hands slightly, not in surrender, but as if preparing to make a point. "Officers," he began, his voice steady and authoritative, "this is my home. I live here. This is my pool." Officer Daniels frowned, clearly confused. "Sir, are you saying this property belongs to you?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, it does. I bought this house 6 months ago. My name is Marcus Johnson." Then, after a brief pause, he added the kicker, "And I'm also your police chief." The reaction was immediate. Both officers froze, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock. Officer Daniels's jaw dropped slightly, while his partner, Officer Ramirez, quickly straightened up, instinctively snapping to attention. It was as though the ground beneath them had shifted. They glanced back and forth between Marcus and Karen, struggling to process the scene unfolding before them. Karen, however, looked like she'd just swallowed something sour. Her face paled, and her earlier bravado crumbled. "Wait, what?" she stammered, her voice trembling. You're the police chief." Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he climbed out of the pool, water cascading off his frame as he grabbed a towel draped over a nearby chair. Wrapping it around his waist, he walked closer to the group, exuding quiet confidence. "That's correct," he confirmed, meeting Karen's wide-eyed gaze. "So as you can see, there's no need for any arrests today, unless, of course, you'd like to press charges for harassment." The weight of his words hit Karen like a freight train. She opened her mouth to speak but found no defense waiting on the tip of her tongue. Instead, she took a stumbling step backward, her phone slipping from her grasp and landing with a soft thud on the grass. The tables had turned completely, and now she was the one scrambling to regain control of the narrative. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's cheeks burned crimson as she fumbled for an explanation, her earlier certainty replaced by panic. She glanced at the officers, then at Marcus, searching desperately for some way to salvage the situation. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "How was I supposed to know? You don't look like someone who lives here." Her poorly chosen words only made matters worse. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "What exactly does someone who looks like they belong look like, ma'am?" he asked pointedly, his tone laced with subtle sarcasm. "Do I need to dress a certain way or act differently for people to believe I own my own home?" Karen flinched, realizing too late that her comment had exposed the biases driving her accusations. She tried to backtrack, waving her hands frantically. No, that's not what I meant. I thought..." Her voice trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. There was nothing left to say. The damage had already been done. "Officer." Daniels cleared his throat, breaking the awkward tension. "Chief Johnson, is there anything you'd like us to do?" he asked respectfully, addressing Marcus with the deference due to his rank. Marcus shook his head, dismissing the idea with a small wave of his hand. "No, thank you," he replied. "This seems to be a simple misunderstanding, though," he added, turning his attention back to Karen. "I think it's important we address why this misunderstanding happened in the first place." Karen winced, knowing full well where this conversation was headed. Still, she attempted to apologize, her words tumbling out in a jumbled mess. "I'm sorry, Chief. I mean, Mr. Johnson, I really am. I didn't recognize you, and I thought I was doing the right thing. Please forgive me." Marcus studied her carefully, weighing her apology against the actions that preceded it. While part of him wanted to let the matter drop, another part recognized the importance of holding her accountable. This wasn't just about him, It was about the larger implications of her behavior. Too often, situations like this ended with Black individuals facing unjust consequences simply because someone decided they didn't belong. Today, however, the roles were reversed, and Karen needed to understand why her assumptions mattered. "I appreciate the apology," Marcus said finally, his voice measured and deliberate. "But I hope you realize that your initial response wasn't based on facts. It was based on assumptions. Assumptions about who I am, where I come from, and whether I deserve to be here. Those kinds of assumptions hurt people. They divide communities and create unnecessary conflict." Karen nodded vigorously, eager to agree with anything that might absolve her of further guilt. "You're absolutely right," she said, her voice tinged with desperation. "I'll be more careful next time. I promise." Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to the officers who stood quietly observing the exchange. "Thank you for coming by," he told them, offering a polite smile. "Let's chalk this up to a learning experience for everyone involved." With that, the officers tipped their hats and returned to their patrol cars, leaving Marcus and Karen alone once again. As the sound of engines faded into the distance, Marcus sighed deeply, running a hand through his damp hair. The confrontation may have ended, but its impact lingered, casting a shadow over what should have been a peaceful afternoon. Word of the incident spread faster than wildfire through Maplewood Heights. By evening, it seemed like every resident had heard some version of the story, though details varied wildly depending on who was telling it. Some neighbors painted Karen as a villainous troublemaker, while others defended her actions, insisting she was only trying to protect the community. Social media buzzed with heated debates, hashtags trending under phrases like Poolgate and Maplewood drama. Opinions clashed, tempers flared, and the once quiet suburb found itself at the center of an unexpected storm. Marcus tried to stay out of the fray, focusing instead on his responsibilities as police chief. But avoiding the spotlight proved impossible. Reporters began calling his office, eager for a statement or quote. Neighbors stopped him during morning walks, offering condolences, praise, or unsolicited advice. Even his own team couldn't resist discussing the situation in hushed tones when they thought he wasn't listening. Though Marcus appreciated the support from those who stood by him, the constant attention weighed heavily on his shoulders. He hadn't asked for this kind of drama. All he'd wanted was a peaceful afternoon by the pool. Despite the chaos, Marcus saw an opportunity amid the turmoil. The incident had exposed deep-seated biases within the community, biases that many preferred to ignore rather than confront. Rather than letting the moment pass without reflection, Marcus decided to use it as a catalyst for change. He announced plans to host a town hall meeting titled Unity Through Understanding, inviting residents to come together and discuss ways to foster mutual respect and inclusivity. Flyers went up around the neighborhood, and local news outlets covered the event extensively, sparking both curiosity and controversy. Not everyone was thrilled about the idea. A vocal minority accused Marcus of exploiting the situation for personal gain, claiming he was using Karen's mistake to push a political agenda. Others argued that holding such a meeting would only deepen divisions, forcing people to take sides in a conflict they didn't want to be part of. Yet, despite the backlash, interest in the town hall grew steadily. Residents packed the community center on the day of the event, filling every seat and spilling into standing room areas. The atmosphere crackled with tension, anticipation, and hope. When Marcus took the stage, the room fell silent. Dressed in his uniform, he commanded attention not through intimidation but through quiet authority. He began by recounting the events of that fateful afternoon, sticking strictly to the facts. Then he shifted focus, speaking candidly about the broader implications of what had happened. "This wasn't just about me," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "It was about how we view one another and the assumptions we make based on appearances. It's about recognizing that these assumptions have consequences, not just for individuals but for our entire community." His words struck a chord with many in the audience. People nodded in agreement, murmured their thoughts to neighbors, and scribbled notes as he spoke. Marcus encouraged open dialogue, inviting attendees to share their perspectives. What followed was a raw, honest exchange of ideas, a mix of frustration, empathy, and determination. Some admitted feeling uneasy about diversity in the neighborhood, while others shared stories of being judged unfairly because of their race, religion, or socioeconomic status. Tears were shed, apologies were offered, and tentative bridges began to form. By the end of the night, something remarkable had happened. A seed of understanding had been planted. While no single meeting could erase decades of prejudice or heal generational wounds, it marked the beginning of a journey toward progress. For Marcus, that was enough. For now. In the weeks following the town hall, life in Maplewood Heights slowly returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible. The initial shock of the incident faded, replaced by quieter conversations held over coffee or during casual encounters at the grocery store. Yet the ripple effects lingered, shaping relationships and attitudes in subtle yet significant ways. Karen became something of a pariah in the community. Her name became synonymous with ignorance and entitlement, whispered behind closed doors and mocked in online forums. Friends distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone whose actions had brought shame to the neighborhood. Strangers glared at her during errands, making her feel like an outsider in a place she'd called home for years. Unable to bear the weight of public scrutiny, Karen eventually put her house on the market and moved away, seeking refuge and anonymity elsewhere. To many, her departure felt like poetic justice, a fitting punishment for her behavior. But to others, it raised uncomfortable questions about accountability versus forgiveness. For Marcus, the aftermath of the confrontation served as both a challenge and an opportunity. On one hand, the ordeal reinforced the harsh realities of living as a black man in a predominantly white suburb. No matter how accomplished or respected he was, there would always be moments when someone doubted his legitimacy simply because of the color of his skin. These reminders stung, chipping away at his patience and resilience. But on the other hand, the experience strengthened his resolve to create meaningful change, not just within the police department, but across the entire community. He threw himself into initiatives aimed at promoting diversity and inclusion, working tirelessly to ensure that incidents like the one at his pool wouldn't happen again. One of his first projects involved partnering with local schools to implement anti-bias training programs for students and teachers alike. He believed that fostering understanding early could prevent harmful stereotypes from taking root later in life. Another initiative focused on building stronger ties between law enforcement and marginalized groups, hosting workshops where officers and residents could engage in open, honest dialogue. The response to these efforts was overwhelmingly positive. Parents praised the educational programs, noting visible improvements in how their children interacted with peers from different backgrounds. Community members expressed gratitude for Marcus's leadership, crediting him with inspiring a cultural shift in Maplewood Heights. Even critics softened their stance, acknowledging the tangible impact of his work. Still, Marcus knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Change took time, effort, and unwavering commitment, all of which he was willing to give. As he reflected on the past few weeks, he realized that the confrontation with Karen had taught him something valuable. Adversity could either break you or make you stronger. In his case, it had done both, testing his limits while reinforcing his belief in the power of grace and perseverance. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus sat by his pool once more. The water shimmered in the fading light, casting golden ripples across its surface. He leaned back in a lounge chair, sipping a cold drink and watching the stars emerge one by one. Despite everything that had transpired, he felt a sense of peace, a quiet confidence that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Challenges lay ahead, but so did opportunities. And Marcus Johnson was ready to face them head-on. The months passed, and Maplewood Heights began to transform in ways both subtle and profound. The town hall meeting had planted seeds of change, but it was Marcus's consistent efforts that nurtured them into growth. Slowly, the community started to embrace a new mindset, one rooted in empathy, accountability, and mutual respect. Conversations that once might have ended in arguments now opened doors to understanding. Neighbors who barely acknowledged each other before began sharing smiles, waves, and even stories over backyard fences. It wasn't perfect, and progress came in fits and starts, but the momentum was undeniable. Marcus continued to lead by example, balancing his role as police chief with his mission to foster unity. He introduced programs designed to bridge gaps between law enforcement and residents, hosting coffee with the chief sessions where people could voice their concerns or simply get to know him outside of his uniform. These informal gatherings became wildly popular, drawing crowds eager to engage with someone they now saw not just as an authority figure, but as a neighbor and ally. Through these interactions, Marcus learned more about the hopes, fears, and dreams of the people he served, and they, in turn, learned more about him as a person. One particularly memorable session took place on a crisp autumn morning. Dozens of residents gathered at a local cafe, sipping lattes and chatting animatedly while Marcus moved from table to table, listening intently to their thoughts. A young mother shared her worries about speeding cars near the elementary school. An elderly man expressed gratitude for the officers who regularly checked on him during cold snaps. When someone finally asked about the infamous pool incident, the room fell silent, unsure how Marcus would respond. Instead of brushing it off or deflecting, Marcus smiled thoughtfully. "That day taught me a lot," he admitted, his voice warm, yet reflective. "It reminded me that no matter how far we think we've come, there's always work to be done. But it also showed me the strength of this community, the willingness to listen, learn, and grow together." His honesty earned applause, breaking the tension and sparking further discussion about how everyone could contribute to positive change. Meanwhile, Karen's departure left a void in the neighborhood, but not necessarily a negative one. Her house sold quickly to a young interracial couple with two energetic kids who quickly became beloved fixtures in the area. Their arrival symbolized a shift toward greater diversity in Maplewood Heights, challenging old norms and broadening perspectives. At first, some neighbors were hesitant, unsure how to interact with a family so different from what they were used. But curiosity soon gave way to connection, thanks in part to Marcus's encouragement to approach differences with openness rather than fear. As winter approached, Marcus hosted an annual holiday celebration at the community center, a tradition he'd revitalized after years of dwindling attendance. This year, however, the event drew record numbers. Families brought dishes representing their cultural backgrounds, turning the potluck into a vibrant tapestry of flavors and traditions. Children laughed as they decorated cookies shaped like snowflakes and stars, while adults exchanged stories around flickering lanterns. For the first time in years, the spirit of togetherness felt genuine, not forced or performative. Standing at the edge of the crowd, Marcus watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. He spotted the young couple dancing awkwardly under twinkling lights, their laughter infectious. Nearby, the elderly man from the coffee session sat beside a teenage girl, teaching her how to fold origami cranes. Even the grumpy old man who lived 3 doors down, known for chasing kids off his lawn, was handing out candy canes with surprising enthusiasm. Moments like these made all the hard work worth it. But Marcus knew better than to rest on his laurels. Change was never a destination. It was a journey, requiring constant effort and vigilance. There would always be setbacks, moments when prejudice reared its ugly head or when progress seemed painfully slow. Yet Marcus remained steadfast in his belief that every small step forward mattered. Whether it was helping a child feel safe walking home from school, or ensuring that marginalized voices were heard in town meetings, he poured his heart into making Maplewood Heights a place where everyone truly belonged. On New Year's Eve, Marcus stood on his back deck, gazing at the sky as fireworks burst into brilliant colors overhead. The pool lay dormant beneath a protective cover, waiting patiently for warmer days to return. Behind him, the faint hum of celebration drifted through open windows, mingling with the crisp night air. As he reflected on the past year, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of pride, not for what he'd accomplished alone, but for what the community had achieved together. He thought back to that fateful summer afternoon when Karen's accusations had shattered his peace. In hindsight, it almost seemed surreal, a bizarre twist of fate that had set off a chain reaction neither of them could have predicted. While the confrontation had been uncomfortable and at times infuriating, it had ultimately led to something beautiful, a chance to confront biases, challenge assumptions, and build a stronger, more inclusive neighborhood. As the clock struck, midnight signaling the start of a new year, Marcus raised a glass of sparkling cider in a silent toast. To resilience, to growth, and to the power of grace in the face of adversity. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to meet them, not with anger or bitterness, but with hope, determination, and an unshakable belief in the goodness of people. And so as the fireworks faded and the echoes of cheers died down, Marcus stepped back inside, closing the door behind him. Tomorrow would bring fresh opportunities, new obstacles, and countless chances to continue shaping a brighter future. For now, though, he allowed himself to savor the quiet joy of knowing he was exactly where he was meant to be, in his own home, surrounded by a community learning to embrace the beauty of difference.